But I'd like to introduce our guest. He is James Roberts, one of the Heritage Foundation's lead experts in economic freedom and growth. He served in the State Department for 25 years before joining Heritage in 2007. And he has completed tours of duty in the United States Foreign Service in Mexico, Portugal, France, Panama, and Haiti. That's quite a resume. James Roberts, welcome to Breitbart News Sunday.
Thanks so much, Joel. Great to be with you.
All right, so there's this index that comes out that those of us who take an interest in such things always anticipate. It's the Index of Economic Freedom. It's very influential. It's an analysis of the economic climate of countries around the world, co-published by Heritage and the Wall Street Journal. Let's talk about where the United States fits right now on that Index of Economic Freedom. Are we moving up or are we moving down?
Unfortunately, we're moving down. In fact, our latest edition, the 2021 Index, which is our 27th edition since we started in 1995, the U.S. Score and rank are the lowest they've ever been. And so we've got work to do in this country, but we're going in exactly the wrong direction at the moment because the main causes of the drop in our score and our ranking are excessive government spending and problems with our judicial system, but unsustainable debt levels, increased regulation, and the COVID crisis has aggravated all of this.
Now, I don't think anybody would argue that the COVID crisis has brought a massive reduction in economic freedom for Americans, particularly in blue states like California, where I live. But wasn't that going on around the world? Weren't there a lot of other countries that did the same thing? Why would we have moved down relative to the rest of the world? Because I know that there were crackdowns in Europe and Asia and all over the place. So why are we doing worse?
Well, I think I should preface this by saying that our data year for preparing this index ended at June 30, 2020. So it goes from July 1st, 2019 to June 30, 2020. So a lot of the really negative impact of the COVID crisis will not be fully captured until the next year's 2022 index. But already the U.S. was opening up the floodgates, and the Federal Reserve was printing money and in time to be captured in this edition of the index. So other countries, since they can't print the world reserve currency, they're in a relatively weaker situation with regard to responding to the pandemic. And of course, the questions of lockdowns also hurt us and many other countries. So it's maybe in part just an element of scale that everything the U.S. does is bigger than the rest of the world. So we went down further. And there's also a troubling trend of Americans not respecting the court system in the United States, and because of the lack of impartiality, the ability of a district federal judge to put a stop to a law passed by Congress, just one judge imposing or some policy of administration and freezing it for the whole country. And people, I think, are getting more resentful by the year about that.
All right, let's talk about where we fit in here. I'm looking at the top 5 countries. We are nowhere near that. You got Singapore in the number 1 spot. Interestingly, New Zealand, number 2, Australia, number 3. Tell us a little bit about what they're doing differently over there, because New Zealand, I mean, the knock in conservative circles is that their prime minister is a bit of a socialist. So how are they number 2 in economic freedom? Australia makes a little more sense, but what are these countries doing that we're not doing?
I think one of the most important things is, in addition to having strong rule of law that has a legacy of the British system, which of course the U.S. has too, Singapore has, obviously New Zealand and Australia have it, and Ireland, although they'd probably be loath to admit it. But in addition to that, they have more freedom for some of their export sectors, especially agriculture. For New Zealand and Australia, there are no agricultural subsidies in New Zealand at all, and we have a gigantic agricultural subsidy system in the United States, as does the European Union. So that has worked to their advantage, actually. They've actually expanded their trade, and their trade freedom score is much higher, and that's one thing that helps them.
Now, we are number 20, so I guess we cracked the top 20. That's pretty good. But Canada is number 9. They're in the top 10. And it's odd because you mentioned the data year goes through the middle of last year, so Donald Trump was still president. And I guess this doesn't reflect the new policies under Biden or anything like that. But I'm surprised that Canada is considered more free economically under Justin Trudeau than the United States was considered under Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the benefits Canada has is that its government spending score. We have, I should explain, our index has 4 what we call pillar areas: the rule of law, the size of the government, how much it taxes, how much it spends, and how much it borrows, the regulatory efficiency of governments at all levels, and the openness to trade and investment, the openness of the banking system. And so Canada, because they depend on us for their defense umbrella, for example, they don't have to spend as much on defense. And they do have a generous and very flawed national health system, which has caused many Canadians to go south of the border to get medical care and surgeries. But the reality is that they do have a better score on things like government spending. And I think their judicial effectiveness has also been a mainstay, as with the other British legacy rule of law countries. So they do have some advantages on us, even though they have a prime minister who is a socialist.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the stimulus that Joe Biden is going to sign in the next several days, the COVID-19 spending, and whether it makes us more free or less free. I think conservatives are arguing one of the reasons to oppose this stimulus is it is going to make us less free. It's going to expand government benefits. It's going to expand government spending, increase the national debt, all the things that you are talking about. But there's an argument that this is helping families that have been forced out of work through no fault of their own, that in a sense these are victims, people who are being helped by the relief bill are victims of government intervention because the government forced their businesses to shut down. The government forced the economy to go into a tailspin. So it's almost kind of a corrective that helps people get back to a place of economic freedom. That's the argument for things like the basic income grant, which people are debating. How do you see the stimulus impacting America's economic freedom going forward?
Well, first of all, when you have the government involved at all, you have a loss of efficiency, and you have a whole layer of bureaucrats raking, skimming off the top of whatever's going on, for starters. If they wanted to really stimulate, they could give every American family $6,000 per person instead of running it through, left-wing NGOs, having a huge education bailout that only a part of it, very small part, actually goes into the next couple of years, and a bulk of it goes into spending all the way up to 2028. Overall, that $2 trillion, only about 9% of it has anything to do with COVID. It is bailing out the big blue states with their welfare systems that are a mess in New York, in California, Illinois, other places. So it will decrease economic freedom at the end of the day. I think it actually costs every American $6,000, and a few lucky Americans, relative handful, are going to get the $1,400 check, and that number has been decreasing ever since the Democrats started talking about it. They have narrowed it more and more. So it's going to be just more bureaucracy, more regulation, more money to special interests who are going to be, promoting more government because that's what they do. And so it's going to have a number of negative impacts, I think, on the economy and really on the political process.
Finally, let me ask you this. What can we do to make our economy more free, to catch up with Australia, let's say, and crack the top 5?
Well, we're going to have to get a handle on this spending for, getting up toward, we're going to end up at $30 trillion of debt. That's, probably a year and a half of total GDP for the country. That's not going to be paid back. It's going to be monetized, practically speaking. And so we're going to have inflation, which is the worst, the cruelest tax of all. Probably many of your listeners don't remember, but I do, the inflationary periods of the 1970s, which were just devastating for the country and the economic freedom. So it's going to have a lot of negative impacts that way.
All right, James Roberts of the Heritage Foundation, we're very glad you were able to join us to explain the Index of Economic Freedom and give a sense of perspective to what's been happening in our nation's capital this week. Thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be with you. Thank you.